All right, hello. Well, thank you for joining us for the seventh episode of the Better Dad Show podcast. I'm Bill Hutchison. The whole idea behind this podcast is that we, as men, would grow. We become better dads, better husbands, and better men for the society that we're in. So that's really what I'm wanting to do out of this. For the first season of the podcast, we're actually reading through the book by Rick Johnson called Better Dads, Stronger Sons. So that's the book that we're reading through right now. It's a really good book. We've done 5 chapters so far. I actually got some pretty decent feedback from the last one because what I want us to find practical things that we can do from this podcast. So we get feedback over at betterdadshow.com as well as on Facebook in the Facebook group, YouTube as well, and on Instagram. Now, for some reason, Facebook decided this week to stop me being able to stream live over there, even though I did the first 6 episodes. So we are right now streaming live on YouTube and on my personal Instagram feed, since the Instagram feed that I set up for Better Dad Show also won't let me stream. So, but if you do go over to betterdadshow.com, that's the best place to then find all the other places that we'll be talking, and also to join in the discussion in the comments for the post. So last week, one of the things that I asked about was for feedback on the skills that we should be teaching our sons. Now, I don't think I was very clear with what I was meaning, because for the kind of skills I was talking about was the physical skills. And so I did get some suggestions for physical skills, but then also for general skills that we should be teaching our kids. I got some feedback about that. I'm hoping that us as a community can look at how can we grow that. Now, whether it's local groups, I'm still trying to tie in with the church that I'm a part of to see if maybe us as dads, as men, can get together and help our sons to grow in these areas. Maybe that's something you could do at your location. Find a group of men that you can actually meet with in person, because it's those in-person relationships that are really going to help to grow it with your son and develop your sons to be better men, and you also to be a better dad, husband, and man. So the skills that some people suggested that be interesting to look at how we can grow were resilience, money management, survival skills, coping with loss, conflict resolution, how to make the perfect cup of coffee. That was actually suggested by my wife, which is a very good skill for us to learn as men. There's also woodworking and metalworking, overcoming adversity, as well as planning, and then actually seeing our plan come to fruition. So those are some of the things that were suggested. And I think that actually ties in really well, a lot of those topics, with what we're talking about this week in the book. So the book's topic for this week is called Making a Noble Man. So I'm going to start reading, and I'll interject when I think that I might have something relevant to add. And then if you are watching or listening live, you can also drop your comments and what you're thinking about what we're reading. So, Chapter 6, Making a Noble Man. Also, this is a 32-page chapter, so we'll be reading for a while. I think last time was over an hour, and it wasn't quite this long, so we will see how we go. So, Making a Noble Man. Scripture's favorite description of a warrior is captured in the oft-repeat phrase, mighty men of valor. Valor is a matter of character. Webster defines valor as strength of mind and spirit. It is this soulish strength, this personal bravery, which enables a man to encounter danger with firmness. It is a warrior's heart and soul, which is the fountainhead of courage, sacrifice, and unselfishness. That was said by Stu Weber from Spirit Warrior. Now, a lot of those things that it talks about right there is the suggestions that the men already listening and commenting were also saying. They're all part of building that character, right? Becoming men of valor, or a noble man. So we'll continue. On the Friday following the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks against our country, I was scheduled to have lunch with my good friend Jim. Jim is a pastor of a small startup church here in Oregon. As we stood in line to order our food, Jim leaned over and whispered, I'm going to pray out loud at noon like President Bush requested. Jim was really nervous and asked if I had any suggestions on how to go about this. I responded somewhat tritely, but truthfully, nope, better you than me. As the noon hour approached, Jim stood up and said in a loud voice to the entire restaurant, "Could I have your attention, please? President Bush has asked the nation to pray for our country at noon today. I don't want to offend anyone, but we're going to be praying at our table, and I'd like to invite you to join us if you want." A stunned silence greeted Jim's speech. Frankly, I admit, I felt a little embarrassed. Jim sat down, and as we waited for 5 minutes for noon to arrive, no one came over. Just before we began to pray, a woman approached her with her young son in tow and asked, "Could we join you? I think what you are doing is great." At the appointed time, Jim began to pray out loud. With my head bowed, I heard the scraping of one or two other people pulling up chairs around our table. Jim prayed out loud for our country, our president, and other leaders, the emergency workers, our military personnel, and the families of the victims of the attacks. He prayed passionately from his heart. I estimate he prayed for about 20 minutes. During the whole time, I did not hear any talking, music, or even doors opening and closing. As he finished, I opened my eyes and looked around. What I saw astounded me. The entire restaurant, perhaps 25 people, including the cooks and servers, were gathered around our table. Many had tears in their eyes. An entire restaurant had halted its operations during the busiest time of the day. The owner came over with tears in her eyes and thanked us, saying, "You can pray here any time you'd like." Everyone had stopped what they were doing and come over to pray, all because of the courage and leadership of one man. It was one of the manliest displays I'd ever seen. Now, whenever I say or hear Jim's name, this example of leadership and courage will always come to mind. I'm especially pleased that the young mother who first joined us brought her son. She showed much courage by being the first one to break the silence with action, thereby freeing up everyone else to act as well. Her son was blessed to have witnessed the courage displayed by both his mother and Jim. So I just need to turn the monitoring on. There we go. That way I know that I'm actually speaking and people can hear me. Mighty men. When we say someone's name, our mind instantly pictures that person. Different character traits that embody that individual also come to mind. When you think of what makes a good man, what character traits come to mind? How a man acts under stress tells a great deal about what kind of character he has. Preston Gillam says, "The story of a man's life is the classic tale of a struggle between right and wrong, good and evil. He lives with constant tension, and how he conquers life and establishes himself proves if he truly understands masculinity or if he is misunderstood or misinformed about manhood. A certain school of thought encourages us to speak it into existence. For example, tell a man he's brave and you help him become brave. With that in mind, tell your son all the things you want him to be. Courageous, loyal, honest, strong, noble, and compassionate. Remind him of these qualities and you help instill them within him. When he exhibits one of them, make sure to praise him. Point them out in others so that he can see them in action. When you're fortunate enough to witness an example like the one Jim set, be sure to discuss it with your son. Boys have a way of becoming what you encourage them to be. A Greek philosopher, Heraclitus, said, "A man's character is his fate." In the previous chapter, we looked at some of the mistakes all men make. Now let's look at some of the character traits we need to instill in our sons and make their fate one of noble masculinity. Here are qualities that come to mind when I think of good men I know. Instill these qualities in your boy and help him to become a noble man. Perseverance. Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful people with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. The slogan, "Press on," has solved and always will solve the problems of the human race. That was said by Calvin Coolidge. The character trait of perseverance is fast becoming lost in our culture. Greatness is born by perseverance in the face of adversity. Few things worth doing are ever easy. Marriage and families sometimes face hard times. Boys must learn to persevere in the face of adversity if they are to struggle forward later, during the even tougher season of life. Perseverance is probably one of the toughest things we teach boys. It requires us to resist the urge to rescue them when they are struggling. Letting them suffer goes against our nature, but suffer they must if they are to develop the strength for the long haul. James 1, verses 2-4 speaks of persevering during tough times. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. That's a tough one, isn't it? To actually celebrate during tough times. I should probably get that verse printed and stuck on my wall somewhere. Okay, keep going. Life isn't easy. It's not meant to be. Sometimes I feel like an old lion surrounded by a pack of hyenas, a once mighty beast who's a little older, a little more tired, and a little slower. Every time I swat at one of the filthy, despicable scavengers, another is nipping at my rear end, all the while patiently stalking me and waiting for the opportunity to take me down for the final time. But I just keep getting back up. When faced with the challenges and disappointments of life, we can respond in one of two ways. One way is to quit and blame someone else. People who do that end up with nothing in life. There's much truth in the saying, winners never quit and quitters never win. Or we can look at our setbacks as opportunities to grow and improve ourselves, even as an opportunity to prove others wrong about us. Strength does not quit. It finishes the task in spite of any difficulty, stays on course in spite of any hazard, and maintains pace in spite of confrontation. When my son Frank was in sixth grade, he decided that he wanted to go out for the middle school wrestling team. I'd wrestled all through high school, so I knew what he would be getting into. My son's a great kid, but he doesn't have a mean bone in his body. After we discussed some of the harder aspects of wrestling, such as exercising vigorously, practicing constantly, watching your weight, and getting slammed to the floor repeatedly, he decided that he still wanted to try out. I have a firm rule with my kids. I don't care what they attempt, but they must stick with it for a reasonable amount of time, usually a season. So with that reminder in mind, Frank trundled off to the wrestling team. Frank was heavy for his age, and since wrestlers are divided by weight classes, he naturally ended up wrestling 8th graders most of the time in practice. The difference in muscle mass between 6th and 8th grade boys can be huge. Many 8th graders have been through puberty and are developing man-like muscles. Most 6th graders haven't. 2 weeks into the season, Frank wanted to quit the team. He was getting hurt by the older boys in practice. He was coming home bruised and battered, crying and saying, "They're hurting me. I just don't want to be hurt anymore." It broke my heart to look into Frank's teary eyes and tell him he couldn't quit. He was going to have to suck it up and be a man, to finish what he started. I prayed many things to God to confirm that I was doing the right thing. To make matters worse, my wife was giving me the look. You know the look. Just lost my page. There we go. The one that says you've got better than 50-50 chance of sleeping outside with a dog if this goes badly. That look. To make a long story short, I made Frank stay on the team. In his first wrestling contest, he was matched against a younger fellow bigger than he was, but about his age and maturity level. During the first 2 rounds and most of the third, Frank was tossed around the mat like a chew toy in the jaws of a puppy. His main strategy was to adopt a turtle-like posture on his belly, probably a defense mechanism learned from wrestling older and bigger boys in practice. Survival was his only goal. However, at the end of the match, his opponent, exhausted from pushing Frank's weight around the mat, inexplicably dropped and rolled over onto his back. Frank looked up in surprise, fell on top of him, and pinned him. Suddenly, Frank's whole countenance changed. He jumped up, dancing around the ring on his toes with his arms in the air. As he looked at me across the gym, he knew that the hours of hard work and pain had paid off. The reward was his because he had not quit when the going was tough, and the reward was that much sweeter, like cool, clear water, refreshing his parched soul, because of the agonies he had endured. We soon discovered, however, we had created a monster. Frank went on to pin his next 7 opponents before finally coming back down to earth. He never wrestled again after that season, but it provided him with several valuable lessons he'd remember his whole life. Lessons such as hard work is his own reward, persistence and perseverance are rewarded, and you must finish what you start. People today, men in particular, seem to quit more easily than they used to. They quit their jobs, they quit their marriages, they quit sports, they quit school, and they quit life whenever obstacles stand in their way or circumstances become too difficult. I've hired quite a number of young men straight out of college. They seem to believe that they are entitled to the same pay, working conditions, and job status as their fathers, who've been in the workforce for 25 years. When that doesn't happen right away, they quit. In our era of instant gratification, the concept of paying one's dues has become lost in the rush to acquire as many material possessions as possible, as quickly as possible. James 1:12 says, "Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. When we talk about persevering through tough times, we generally look at it from the perspective of someone else. It always seems tougher when we are the ones going through the battle. I have friends who have given up when the going got tough. These men, seemingly strong and manly on the outside, did not have the intestinal fortitude to keep fighting the good fight when the battles in their lives got fierce. They quit at the first twinge of pain. I shudder when I think of the examples they set in their sons' eyes. I also have good friends who have struggled through failing businesses, daughters with eating disorders, marital problems, wayward children, cancer, and other illnesses. These men stayed the course and persevered during their times of struggle. They've come through their trials confident and strong in their faith. These men are an inspiration to me. Not surprisingly, each of these men's sons has a strong faith in God and a well-developed sense of perseverance. Help your son understand the rewards that await him by overcoming and persevering through difficult circumstances. Character is forged in the furnace of affliction. Perseverance is one of those qualities that builds strength of character. And really, when it's all said and done, the only thing a man has that can't be taken from him is his character. The book is continually reminding us that the biggest thing we can be for our sons isn't what we say, isn't the courses we set up for them, but it's who we are. It's like the example that we set for them, right? That's why becoming a better dad is all about becoming a better man and becoming a better husband, to be that example for our kids. Continuing. Mental toughness and resilience. Sometimes life just knocks us flat on our backside. Out of the blue, we get let go from a seemingly secure job. Our wife leaves us unexpectedly for another man, or a serious illness sneaks up and jumps on our back. A man with mental toughness might get knocked down by these kinds of events, but like a modern-day gladiator, he refuses to stay down. He gets back up, swinging. Your boy's going to get knocked down from time to time. How he responds to adversity will dictate the resilience he has within him. Resilience is having the inner strength to cope with any challenge. It's crucial for any boy who is forced to face severe adversity. But in our fast-paced, stressful world, all kids need the capacity to overcome obstacles and deal with disappointments, whether in school, on the soccer field, or at the playground. I love how these are just answering so many of the feedback that we got from the last one about what we should be teaching our kids. How to make them a noble man, right? I guess that makes sense. One of my favorite movies, Rudy, is based on a true story. The main character, Daniel Rudy Rudiger, played by actor Sean Astin, is a young man from a blue-collar family with the dream of playing football for the University of Notre Dame. A student with poor grades and no money, he overcomes tremendous odds by getting accepted into Notre Dame. First, he worked in a steel mill for 4 years to raise money. Then he attended Holy Cross College for 2 years to raise his grade point average high enough to meet Notre Dame's admission standards. On top of this, he had to work in order to pay tuition. When faced with disappointment after disappointment, Rudy asked himself, "Have I done everything I possibly can?" Finally, after a long struggle and many disappointments, Rudy was accepted as a student at Notre Dame. But being accepted to Notre Dame was only the beginning of his struggles. Being short, slow, and athletically challenged. Being short, slow, and athletically challenged made making the football team seemingly impossible. As his boss told him, "You're 5 feet nothing and 100 nothing, and you've got hardly a speck of athletic ability." Only his attitude, courage, and persistence during tryouts gained him the admiration of a line coach, who gave him one of the precious few spots on the practice squad. The practice squad ran the opposing team's plays each week against the first string. Rudy refused to allow the bigger players to stop crushing him in practice because he didn't want his weakness to hurt the team's chances of winning. Battered and bloody, he sacrificed his all for the good of the team. After 2 years of allowing himself to be annihilated in practice by players much bigger, stronger, and faster than himself, he had earned the unconditional respect of every one of his teammates. Rudy's mental toughness had made up for his physical shortcomings. Rudy's ultimate dream was for his father to see him on the playing field with the team during a game. None of his family believed he was really on the team because the practice squad did not suit up for games. Finally, at the insistence of all the starting players, he was given a chance to suit up for the last game of the season his senior year. At the end of the game, with all the fans and his teammates chanting his name, he was even allowed into the game for the final play, and he tackled the opposing quarterback. He was subsequently carried off the field by the team to the wild cheers of the crowd. Rudy's resilience and positive attitude, despite overwhelming odds, impacted everyone who came in contact with him. His example of what we are capable of when we just don't quit should be an inspiration to all men and boys. Resilience is like a willow tree. During a fierce windstorm, it bends but never breaks. It can also absorb devastating damage and bounce back healthier and stronger than before. Some experts think resilience is the most important character trait we can teach our children. Certainly, if you were to die early, resilience would be the best character trait your children could possibly possess. It would allow them to go on and succeed in life in your absence. It's a challenge for us, isn't it, to make sure we don't quit and our kids don't see us quit. Commitment. It takes a real man to be a father. Almost any adult male can perform a physical act and produce a child, but that doesn't make him a father. Being a father takes commitment. This is precisely why a dedicated stepfather is capable of being a better dad than an uninvolved biological father. Several years ago, I was coaching the girls' JV basketball team at one of our local high schools. On trips for away games, I made it my practice to sit at the front of the bus while the girls sat at the back. If you've ever been around a dozen 16-year-old girls, you understand. The noise can be deafening. One particular evening, while returning home from a game, the bus was unusually quiet. As we entered town, I heard a plaintive voice from the back explain, "There's where my daddy lives." The longing and sadness in her voice broke my heart. Suddenly, several other voices popped up. "My daddy lives at such and such address. Where does your daddy live?" Hearing these good girls long for their fathers brought tears to my eyes. I estimated from observation and comment I'd overheard during the season that about half of the team came from single-parent homes. Remarkably, few parents attended the games and even fewer fathers showed up. These girls were nice, well-mannered, and academically successful, yet each longed for the same thing, her daddy. I wish their fathers could have been on that bus and heard the anguished cries of their children's souls that night. Another scenario occurred on my daughter's high school soccer team. My daughter and several other girls were sitting around after practice discussing their favorite topics, boys and shopping. As my daughter was bemoaning the fact that even though I supplied the money, I still went with her and monitored the kinds of clothes she bought, one of the girls stated sadly, "I'd give anything just to have my daddy around to go shopping with me." Several of the other girls readily agreed, causing my daughter to look at her shopping experiences with a whole new light. Sociologist David Blankenhorn believes every man in the United States should be requested to take the following pledge. Many people today believe that fathers are unnecessary. I believe the opposite. I pledge to live my life according to the principle that every child deserves a father, that marriage is the pathway to effective fatherhood, that part of being a good man means being a good father, and that America needs more good men. I say, and the world needs more good men. Being a husband and father takes commitment. Commitment is keeping the promises we've made, including implicit promises, such as when we commit to being a parent by simply becoming one. Your son will need this character trait when things get tough. Without it, he will let down those who depend upon him for survival. Integrity. A task becomes a duty from the moment you suspect it to be an essential part of that integrity which alone entitles a man to assume responsibility. Dag Hammarskjöld from the book Markings. Integrity is doing the right thing no matter the circumstances. Integrity is not situational ethics. How can you teach your son to be an upright man of integrity in a deceitful and distrustful world? This story by Al Covino illustrates the kind of integrity I want my son to exhibit. As a high school coach, I did all I could to help my boys win their games. I rooted as hard for victories as they did. A dramatic incident, however, following a game in which I officiated as a referee, changed my perspective on victories and defeats. I was refereeing a league championship basketball game in New Rochelle, New York, between New Rochelle and Yonkers High. Now, Rochelle was coached by Dan O'Brien, Yonkers by Les Beck. The gym was crowded to capacity, and the volume of noise made it impossible to hear. The game was well played and closely contested. Yonkers was leading by 1 point as I glanced at the clock and discovered there were but 30 seconds left to play. Yonkers, in possession of the ball, passed off. Shot missed. Now Raquel recovered, pushed the ball up court, shot. The ball rolled tantalizingly around the rim and off. The fans shrieked. Now Raquel, the home team, recovered the ball and tapped it in for what looked like a victory. The tumult was deafening. I glanced at the clock and saw the game was over. I hadn't heard the final buzzer because of the noise. I checked with the other official, but he could not help me. Still, seeking help in this bedlam, I approached the timekeeper, a young man of 17 or so. He said, "Mr. Covino, the buzzer went off as the ball rolled off the rim before the final tap-in was made." I was in the unenviable position of having to tell Coach O'Brien the sad news. "Dan," I said, "time ran out before the final basket was tapped in. Yonkers won the game." His face clouded over. The young timekeeper came up. He said, "I'm sorry, Dad. The time ran out before the final basket." Ooh, there's a twist. Suddenly, like the sun coming out from behind a cloud, Coach O'Brien's face lit up. He said, "That's okay, Joe. You did what you had to do. I'm proud of you." Turning to me, he said, "Al, I want you to meet my son, Joe." The two of them then walked off the court together, the coach's arm around his son's shoulder. What is precisely the kind of choice we need to reward our boys for making? Integrity like that is taught by the lifestyle we lead, the examples we set as men. One man I know spent a year in jail, losing his business, his house, and his life savings because he refused to tell a judge that he would quit picketing an abortion clinic. He lost what the world says is important, all because he believed strongly enough in the biblical principle of thou shalt not murder, that he was willing to stand by his values. That man's kids may have lost some material goods and some time with their father, but they have a dad they can look up to in legendary proportions. What an incredible example to set for your children. The legacy he leaves will impact generations. His heirs will be talking about what he did for many years to come. Value what is right over what is popular. That provides a foundation upon which to build integrity and leadership skills. As much as children need love from a dad, they also need a dad who is a loyal warrior, involved in the battles they face every day. So this one's called loyalty. As much as children need love from a dad, they also need a dad who is a loyal warrior, involved in the battles they face every day. During the Barcelona Olympics, an unforgettable father-son scene occurred. You probably remember that moment when desperate failure was instantly transformed to high achievement by the love of a father. Derek Redmond of Great Britain had trained for the Olympic 400-meter run for years. After the Seoul Olympics, he had a total of 5 operations on both Achilles tendons, but he bounced back. He was running well and competing in the Olympic semifinal. Halfway around the track, however, Derek's right hamstring gave way. He fell to the track in agony, sprawled across the 5th lane. The television cameras focused on defending Olympic champion Steve Lewis as he won the race and headed towards the tunnel. Medical attendants urged Derek to stay still, but he pushed them aside, struggling to his feet, and began hopping in a crazed attempt to finish the race. Then something remarkable happened. Jim Redmond, Derek's father, witnessed his son's struggles from high up in the stands. Jim Redmond probably knew before anyone in the stands that something wasn't right. He also must have known that the best thing for his son's leg was for him to sit down and get immediate treatment. But this father also knew his son. He'd watched his son train for this moment for 4 years. His son had come to Barcelona for one reason, to finish this race. He knew how important that was for his son, and he was willing to do whatever it took to see his son achieve that goal. Jim Redmond came rumbling out of the stands in his shorts and white t-shirt. All he knew was that his son needed help. He flung a security guard out of the way and ran to his son, who had just reached the home stretch. Jim Redmond put his arm around his son and said, "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," said Derek. "Well then," said Jim without hesitation, "we're going to finish this together." The crowd realized that Derek Redmond was running the race of his life. They stood and cheered, just as I wanted to do as I fought back the tears when I saw it on television. Derek leaned against his father, sometimes burying his face in the shoulder to hide his tears, and they stayed on Derek's lane all the way to the finish line. An usher attempted to intercede and escort Jim Redmond off the track, but his efforts were futile. They crossed the finish line, father and son, arm in arm. Jim Redmond was one loyal dad. How does one develop loyalty like that in a boy? You teach loyalty by being loyal. Does your son believe that you always have his best interests at heart? Even when he's mad because you don't let him do what everyone else is doing? Does he know that you will stand by him even when everyone else is against him? Loyal dads produce loyal sons. Again, we're talking about modeling, aren't we? Loyal people stick with you when all else is in turmoil. Loyal people will still love you even when they know you. There are people who, despite your human failures, still believe in you. Those are the kind of people I want in my life. My hope is that all fathers would have the loyalty to know their children and willingly spring into action to help meet their needs. We teach loyalty best by being loyal in times of struggle. Manners. This is the final test of a gentleman. His respect for those who can be of no possible value to him. William Lloyd Phelps. Teach your son how to treat others. Politeness is just plain good manners, and good manners never go out of style. Manners show respect for others, regardless of their status or attitude. Perhaps the best model to hold up for boys is the Boy Scouts Credo. On my honor, I promise to be trustworthy, loyal, helpful, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Not a bad model for a young man to aspire to, is it? I believe that each of us has been blessed by God with individual gifts. Some people have the gift of athletic ability. Some have been blessed with intellect. Others are great orators or writers, and some are destined to be great leaders. In trying to determine what each of my children's God-given gifts are, I've come to realize that my son has been blessed with the gift of likability. Everywhere we go, whatever situation he's involved in, people like him and are drawn to him in a remarkably short period of time. I think, after observing this phenomenon for the past several years, that it is at least in part due to the fact that he is unfailingly polite and equally open to everyone, except his sister, of course. Sounds familiar. Sounds like my family. Even when treated rudely, he continues to be polite to others, and they eventually respond in kind. I'm not sure how he learned to hone this gift, but he certainly didn't catch it from me. But it works. Consequently, people want to spend time around him and are compelled to help him and want to see him succeed. The gift of being polite and well-mannered opens doors for him that might otherwise be closed, and it will probably help him to be successful throughout his life, no matter what he chooses to accomplish. Manners for young gentlemen. Telephone etiquette. How to answer the telephone properly and take a message. 2. Manners regarding women. Helping seat her, holding doors open, walking on the outside of the sidewalk between a woman and traffic, standing when a woman enters a room. 3. Personal manners. Not dressing like a slob, not wearing a baseball cap or hat indoors. Learning good personal hygiene. And also table etiquette. Not bolting his food, learning how to set a table, learning proper table manners, treating waitstaff properly in a restaurant. Next one is courage. Be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, be men of courage, be strong. 1 Corinthians 16, verse 13. Edmund Burke said the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. It sure seems like a lot of men today are allowing evil to flourish just by doing nothing. One man who did do something to thwart evil was Todd Beamer. On September 11, 2001, Todd Beamer, a Wheaton College graduate and evangelical Christian, was one of the passengers aboard United Airlines Flight 93 when it was hijacked by terrorists. After passengers were herded to the back of the jet, Beamer called the GTE customer service in Oak Brook, Illinois. He told Supervisor Lisa Jefferson about the hijacking. The passengers were planning to jump the terrorists, he said, and then he asked her to pray with him. As Flight 93 hurtled towards destruction, Todd Beamer could not have known that his quiet prayers would ultimately be heard by millions, that the story of his last acts on earth would be witnessed to the Lord he loved and serve as a lasting example to true heroism. Up to that moment, Beamer had been all business. Lisa, he said suddenly. Yes, responded Jefferson. That's my wife's name, said Beamer. Well, that's my name too, Todd, said Jefferson. Oh my God, said Beamer. I don't think we're going to get out of this thing. I'm going to have to go out on faith. Jefferson tried to comfort him. Todd, she said, you don't know that. Beamer asked her to promise to call his wife if he didn't make it home. He told her about his little boys and the new baby on the way. Then he said that the other passengers were going to try to jump the hijackers. You sure that's what you want to do, Todd? Asked Jefferson. That's what we have to do, he answered. He asked her to pray with him. Beamer kept the Lord's Prayer bookmark in his Tom Clancy novel, But he didn't need any prompting. He began to recite the litany, and she joined him, Our Father, who art in heaven. After they finished, Beamer said, Jesus, help me. He recited the 23rd Psalm, then Jefferson heard him say, You guys ready? Let's roll. Now we know from the cockpit voice recorder that Beamer and the other passengers wrestled with the hijackers and forced the plane to crash into the ground, killing themselves but foiling what was believed to have been the hijackers' plan to fly Flight 93 into the Capitol or the White House. It wasn't Todd Beamer's job to fight terrorists. He was just a passenger who, along with other brave men and women, did what they didn't have to do and ended up foiling a terrible evil that might have been done to his country. Todd Beamer was one of the many heroes of Flight 93 that day. Whatever his heroism was inspired by, what matters most is that in the end, he did act heroically. Todd Beamer showed one kind of courage, physical courage. Other kinds of courage are just as difficult and just as heroic. Courage or bravery is simply doing what needs to be done even though you're scared and tired. It is the ability to confront fear in the face of pain, danger, uncertainty, or intimidation. It's not standing on the sidelines for complacency. Teach your son to lead courageously, to stand by his convictions even when the consequences of those convictions may result in pain, sorrow, or unpleasant circumstances. Someday he will lead his own family. Fathers are faced with tough decisions every day. Sometimes it's easy to take the cowardly way out under pressure. The question is, do you want him to lead with courage or with cowardice? Courage often requires a willingness to sacrifice for others. That's the kind of courage your son needs to lead a family. The courage to continue to do what is right, even when all those around him are calling for him to compromise. The courage to sacrifice his needs and desires for the betterment of others. The courage to get up and go to work every day when he hates his job. The courage to stay married when he could easily run off with a woman from work who really understands him. The courage to live after a child has died. The courage to face and possibly even overcome life-threatening diseases. The courage to speak out against immorality when no one else seems to care. The courage to stand by his convictions in the face of overwhelming criticisms. Compassion. Our world has a great need for compassion, as this story illustrates. It's no secret that America is in the midst of a spiritual and moral crisis. Polls today indicate that most Americans are deeply concerned about the direction our nation is heading. The real problem is a critical shortage of people who care enough to get off the sidelines and make a difference. Sometimes it only takes one person to turn the flow from negative to positive. Take, for example, Babe Ruth, the most famous baseball player of all time. The Babe finished his career in a slump, and according to one legendary story, he was jeered mercilessly one day in Cincinnati. As he made his customary trot out off the field to the dugout, the fans began to yell obscenities at him. The booing intensified until a little boy jumped the fence and ran to his hero's side. The child threw his arms around Babe's legs, crying as he fiercely hugged him. Moved by the young lad's display of affection and emotion, Ruth gently swept the boy upward and into his arms. As they walked off the field, the man and boy cried together. Suddenly the hoots, howls, and curses ceased. The eerie silence was replaced by a thunderous ovation. Fans of all ages now began to weep. Compassion is the ability to empathize with and have sympathy for another's feelings. It is the ability to extend mercy. If our sons do not learn this character trait, how will they ever be able to truly understand and appreciate God's gift to us? How too will they be able to competently father through situations in which they have no experience? Compassion will enable them to understand when their 15-year-old daughter's hormonal spikes cause her behavior to surge back and forth between calm rationality one minute and raging lunacy the other, or to stay strong when everything in their world seems to be going wrong. Self-discipline and self-control. As we drove home from the county fair one afternoon, my son commented, "I hate it that you're so critical of other drivers. You always yell at them and criticize them." My first thought was, it's because they're all such knuckleheads. My second thought was, oh man, he's right. I was being critical of every other driver on the road, every time I drove anywhere. For the past several years, I had been ranting and raving whenever I went anywhere in the car. I was setting a horrible example for my wife and children, and they were sick of listening to me. I was struck that not only was this a control issue that I needed to deal with, but it had also become a habit, one due to my own lack of self-discipline and self-control. Self-discipline is doing what we don't want to do but should. Self-control is not doing something we want to do but shouldn't. These two traits are different yet inexplicably interwoven. A lack of one or both of these character traits sinks more men and destroys more lives than any other character deficit. An absence of either of these traits leads men into addictions like drugs, gambling, pornography, drinking, and adultery, all of which are family destroyers and soul killers. These character traits keep a man from doing things in private that he would never do in public. They are inner strengths that a man develops over time with exercise, like a muscle. Typically, if a man lacks self-discipline in one area of his life, he lacks self-control in other areas of his life as well. Discipline, which is the core of self-discipline, is being able to control your life by having a sense of priorities, by putting first things first. Discipline governs thoughts and actions. In discipline, we have to work hard and develop right habits. How does a boy develop self-discipline and self-control? One of the ways to develop discipline is to keep score on ourselves. When a boy learns to monitor his own behavior against the code of ethics and principles established by his father, he develops self-discipline and eventually becomes responsible for his own life. Another way he develops these traits is by being responsible for his actions. Our old friend accountability again. For instance, if your son's going to a movie is predicated upon his cleaning his room and he doesn't clean it, you can't go to the movie. If you told him no ice cream if he doesn't eat his dinner, then no ice cream if he doesn't eat his dinner, even if the rest of his siblings get ice cream. If he's disrespectful to you, well, let's just say he needs to learn early that it might be a little dangerous to disrespect dad. Let me qualify that last statement by saying that's part of a father's influence, the fear factor. A father's job is to teach his son the fact that sometimes there are unpleasant consequences to unwise actions. I'm not promoting physical violence here, but unpleasant consequences usually only need to be endured one time to be effective in this type of situation. A big mistake some of today's new age fathers make is allowing their kids to be disrespectful to them. I've seen it many times. Once the inherent God-given respect with which you have been endowed is lost, you'll have a hard time getting it back. You probably know some men whose names you would never associate with the words self-discipline or self-control. What do you think of those men? Probably not what you'd want people to think of when your son's name is mentioned. In this instant gratification world we live in, developing self-control and self-discipline may be the greatest gift you can give your son as he grows into manhood. Honesty. You may pay for conformity. All goes well as long as you run with conformists. But you, who are honest men in other particulars, know that there is alive somewhere a man whose honesty reaches to this point also, that he shall not kneel to false gods, and on the day when you meet him, you sink into the class of counterfeits. Ralph Waldo Emerson. The dictionary defines honest as free from deception, truthful, genuine, real, reputable, credible, marked by integrity, frank, upright, just, conscientious, honorable. Are there any character traits listed here that you don't want your son to be known for? Yeah, I don't think so. I'd love for my kids, all my kids to be known for those traits. One of the hardest things for a man to do is admit when he's wrong. Well, that's particularly not earth-shattering news to any of us. Be aware that your son struggles with the same natural inclinations. Males are taught from a young age to always be right, to know how to fix things, to have all the answers. It's a heavy burden, one compounded by not being honest enough with ourselves and others to admit we are human. Men fall into a trap of believing they have to be perfect. It's a no-win situation, and we can start remedying the problem by learning how to admit when we are wrong and ask for forgiveness. Males have a much easier time being truthful with others if they are honest with themselves first. In order to do this, a boy needs to learn about his own individual strengths and weaknesses. Some weaknesses, such as a lustful nature, are inherent in most men. By being honest with himself, a man can be aware of potential character pitfalls. For example, most people would consider me to be a diligent, hardworking man, and I am, but only because I know myself to be lazy in nature. I force myself, through self-discipline, to work hard because I know if I don't, my natural inclination towards laziness will surface and prevent me from fulfilling the destiny that God has planned for me. Likewise, men, because of their susceptibility to carnal lust, should stay away from areas of temptation such as pornography and strip clubs. Let your son know early on that you expect honesty from him at all times. Then model that behavior yourself. A man who is honest with himself is honest to others. A man's word is his bond. In fact, a man's word is the measure of his character. If you give your word to someone, you are making a covenant with that person. So if you tell your wife, son, or daughter that you love them, then turn around and verbally abuse them, breaking your promise, or act irresponsibly, you have not lived up to your word. You cannot love someone and simultaneously lie to them. It is incongruous behavior. Honesty keeps us from making those kinds of mistakes in our lives. One NFL pre-game show asks players being interviewed whether they would be rather known as nice or honest. I'm a little surprised at how many men respond nice. Little white lies to protect someone's feelings are not necessarily innocent. The art of diplomacy, good manners, and honesty will serve your son better throughout life than even a small lie. Humility. Integrity begins with humility. Most young men are filled with pride. I was. But pride infects our thought process and keeps us from being all that we are capable of being. Remember, it's not about us. The opposite of pride is humility. Humility is what allows men to achieve great things with a purpose higher than themselves. This includes putting their family's well-being ahead of their own wants and desires. Peter said this about humility. All of you, clothe yourself with humility towards one another, because God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. 1 Peter 5, verse 5. But humility seems to have gotten a bad rap today. If someone, especially a man, is called humble or exhibits humility, the connotation is that he is a wimp. Humility is somehow associated with being humiliated, while pride is looked upon as a virtue. Young men are supposed to be confident, cocky, overachieving go-getters who never admit they're wrong. However, the Webster Dictionary defines humble as 1. Not proud or haughty. 2. Not pretentious, unassuming. 3. Modest. All in all, pretty good character traits. Some of the wisest, happiest, and most successful men I know are extremely humble individuals. The Bible says this about pride. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Proverbs 16:18. And about pride versus humility it says, a man's pride will bring him low, but the humble in spirit will retain honor. Proverbs 29:23. The older I get, the more stock I put in humility. Maybe it's because humility comes with maturity. Men who are humble are often gentle as well, another word that has gotten a bad image in our culture. Understand that meekness or gentleness is not necessarily weakness. Gentleness is really power under control. Jesus was gentle, but no man ever walked the earth with more power. Jesus just controlled his power. I've heard gentleness likened to the quivering muscles of a mighty war horse awaiting battle. Power under control. Men who are confident in their place in the world are like powerful, humble war horses. We need to teach our sons humility, the humility that comes from others having faith in us. Trustworthiness. Because of my background, I grew up believing that those closest to me continually let me down. I vowed at an early age, even before consciously realizing it, that I would never rely on or trust anyone. I believed that I was the only one I could depend on. Since then, I've learned that you have to depend not only on God, but on other people as well. As men, we must have other people in our lives in order to function properly. To trust someone is to know that he will stand beside you, that he won't cut and run when the going gets tough. Preston Gillam says, trust is the confidence that continues to believe, even if what you believe appears to be untrue. To my way of thinking, trust is one step deeper than faith. Interesting. One of the ways I typically evaluate a man's character is asking whether I would trust him to cover my back in battle. Some people, usually men I wouldn't trust in battle, have commented that that's a harsh way to judge someone, but I don't think it is. We're in a war, a spiritual war, and we need people around us we can trust to cover our backs. People who put our well-being ahead of their own. We need men who care enough about us and have our best interests at heart, so much that they are willing to challenge our actions and decisions, even if we get angry with them. Men who are trustworthy are dependable. Can he be counted upon? Can his word be his bond? Are his wife, children, and friends confident that he will be there for them when times are tough? A man who is dependable can be counted on to do what is best for you and others around him. These are the kind of men we need as leaders. The Bible puts it this way: but select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times. Let them bring every difficult case to you, but the simple ones they can decide for themselves. Exodus 18:21-22. Talk to your son about your own life and what being able to trust someone means to you. If you have trouble trusting due to past experiences, discuss with him so that he can understand how trustworthiness is such a strong character trait in a man and how damaging it can be when violated. Honor, the essence of a noble man. A man realizes that he is in a unique position to give honor like no one else, and that no one can truly replace that responsibility for him. He avoids sarcasm, put-downs, belittling words, and ways that diminish the honor of a person. Stu Weber, 4 Pillars of a Man's Heart. Our discussion of the positive character traits that make a noble man can be summed up in one sentence: a noble man is a man of honor. Hold your son to the higher standard of honor. Honor defines the character of a man. Character is like granite, withstanding the winds and rains of our culture. In the movie Rob Roy, Liam Neeson plays Robert Roy McGregor, a clan chieftain in the early 1700s Scottish Highlands. In the beginning of the movie, Rob Roy has the following conversation with his 2 younger sons about honor. Son: Father, will McGregors ever be kings again? Rob: all men with honor are kings, but not all kings have honor. Son: what is honor? Rob: honor is what no man can give you, and none can take away. Honor is a man's gift to himself. Son: do women have it? Rob: women are the heart of honor, and we cherish and protect it in them. You must never mistreat a woman or malign a man, or stand by and see another do it. Son: how do you know if you have it? Rob: never worry on the getting of it. It grows in you, and it speaks to you. All you need to do is listen. Fathers have been positioned by God to have powerful influences to bestow honor on their families. When you teach your son the dignity of honor, you give him a noble vision of masculinity. In the movie The Last Samurai, Tom Cruise plays Captain Woodrow Algren, a highly decorated Civil War hero. Algren is compelled to drink himself into a stupor every day in order to live with the atrocities he witnessed and committed during battle. Hired by the Japanese government to teach modern warfare to the new Japanese feudal army, he is captured in the first battle by the last remaining band of samurais. The samurai were Japan's warrior class for 7 centuries. They served as private soldiers, protecting their daimyo, or lord. The word samurai literally means those who serve. As hereditary warriors, they were governed by a strict code of ethics, Bushido, meaning the way of the warrior, that defined service and conduct appropriate to their status as elite members of Japanese society. Their code required a lot of physical hardship, absolute devotion to duty, bravery in all things. It also revolved around a complex system of honor and respect. After living with the samurai for the winter, Cruise's character Algren is captivated by their lifestyle and code of conduct. Algren eventually regains his honor by fighting for the samurai's noble cause. One scene sums up his belief in the importance of the honor code of the samurai. The leader of the samurai, believing defeat is imminent, is contemplating committing suicide in order to avoid the shame of defeat. Algren says shame for a life of service, discipline, compassion. The way of the samurai is not necessary anymore. Necessary? What could be more necessary? The French call it noblesse oblige. I can't say it. Noblesse oblige, something like that. The obligation of honorable generous, and responsible behavior associated with high rank or birth. Honor seems to be one of the key ingredients in fulfilling a man's life, no matter his nationality or race. And yet our culture does not promote honor within men. C.S. Lewis said, "We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the geldings be fruitful." Our world does not seem to hold honor in very high regard. At least we seldom tout it when it is observed. Then we expect men to act honorably and are shocked when they don't. Men need honor. It is essential to our being. Michael Gurian says, "Honor and honor codes are essential to boys and men, because males are both hardwired and softwired for performance. They are very conscious of how they perform. Boys develop personal codes of honor, and they are sponge-like in their absorption of codes of honor suggested to them by their nurturing systems. They watch their parents' honor codes like hawks, remembering every detail. They are vulnerable to the honor codes provided them by mentors. If parents, mentors, and educators don't provide them with honor training, they will learn honor codes from peers, who sometimes promote codes that are dangerous." Being honorable and having the ability to give honor are important factors in becoming an effective husband and father. Honor often requires us to put others' needs ahead of our own. Gurian continues, "If I do not have a well-developed sense of honor, I will become undisciplined and probably somewhat dangerous in my relationships when they confuse me. Without a clear sense of honor, I have little firm ground to stand on, and I often become overwhelmed by the wants of another person. Adult males and females who have been trained in compassion and sensitivity but not honor end up destroying their marriages. They do not have the inner strength to pull back in the self and hold on while the partner goes through immense, confusing inner changes of his or her own." I used to look at honoring others from the wrong perspective. I used to think some people weren't worthy of being given honor. Gary Smalley did too. He said, Sorry, getting a bit parched. Gary Smalley did too. He said, I used to think you had to like people to honor them. I thought they had to be performing well before you could honor them. But honor has nothing to do with performance. It has everything to do with attitude. Honor is a gift of grace. It shows the other person that you value him or her. Honor is something you give a person without his having to earn it. Did we earn the love of God? No. Did Christ come to die in your place because you did something worthwhile? No. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. We were shaking our fists in God's face, saying we didn't want him, yet he sent his son to die for us because he valued us so dearly. I want my son to have honor, to stand tall in the fierce winds of adversity blow around him, to cherish and protect women and children, to fight for justice and equality, to stand for something. How about you? What character traits do you want people to think of when your son's name is mentioned? Teaching honor. How do you teach honor to your son? In order to focus your energies on this question, take a moment to answer these questions. Have I modeled, again, it's about modeling, right? Have I modeled loyalty this week? Have I talked with my boy about the loyalty I was modeling? Have I modeled duty this week? Have I talked with my boy about my duties and his? Have I modeled fairness this week? Have I talked with my boy about why I made those decisions about fairness? In this chapter, we discussed some of the qualities a boy needs to develop in order to reach his potential as a man. This is not an exhaustive list, nor can you reasonably expect your son to master all these traits summarized here. However, by being aware of what character traits you admire and respect in a man, you can more easily help your son develop a powerful vision of masculinity as he grows older. Your son needs to understand that no man is an island. His choices and the decisions he makes affects other people's lives, whether he is willing to admit it or not. Our decisions impact other lives like a pebble dropped in a pond creates ripples across the surface. When your son becomes a father, his decisions will create ripples in people's lives for generations thereafter. Teach your son that his family name stands for honor. Honor will create a legacy in your lineage that will change the world. So that's the chapter. Now, there are some questions afterwards. So questions for reflection and discussion. Now, I'll write out these questions over at betterdadshow.com so you can answer them there if you want to, or even just contemplate them yourself and see what you think about it and how it can affect you and how you're being a parent, how you're being a father. So questions for reflection and discussion. 1. Make a list of character traits you want your sons to have. Discuss with other men why these traits are important in general, and to you in particular. How can you help instill these traits in your son? 2. Think of the best example you've witnessed of manly behavior and discuss it with your son. And 3. Tell your son what you think makes a man. Ask him what character traits he thinks are manly. So that's it. We'll put those over at betterdadshow.com, where you can go and we can continue the discussion there. Now, this is a value for value podcast. So if you got value from it, you can share it with others. You can donate over at betterdadshow.com to help pay for the hosting and the equipment. And you can also donate content. If you have something you want to add, I'd love to hear from you. So again, just head over to betterdadshow.com and you can leave your feedback. I hope that we are continuing to grow in our ability as a father and husband and man so that we can have a positive impact on this world, and especially as we go through this season 1, talking about developing our sons, that we can have a positive impact as them as we model the characteristics to our kids that we want them to have. So again, thank you very much, and we will catch you again next time.